Well, hello everyone. Thanks for tuning in again today. I hope you had a great week. I want to encourage you from another lesson of Bible teaching from God's Word. Today we're going to be in Luke chapter 5. If you would turn there, we're going to look at one of the conversations that Jesus had with another one of his disciples. This time it will be Peter. Now we've already looked at a conversation that he had with the leper, and we found out there that miracles are purposeful. We've also looked at a conversation that he had with the centurion, and there we found out that faith gets noticed. We looked at a conversation he had with Martha, and we know that time with Jesus is essential. Today, through the story of this conversation with Peter, we're going to find out that a broken spiritual relationship can be restored. Now, the story we're going to look at today is kind of all over the place. We're going to look at 3 out of the 4 Gospels, and we're really going to look at a conversation that lasted over 3 years between Jesus and Peter. And I'm going to hit some of the highlights of those. We're going to read a lot of Scripture, but if you'll stick with me when we get to the end, it will be well worth your time. So stick with me, and you won't be sorry. In Luke chapter 5, we pick up with Jesus teaching to a great crowd, and they were kind of pressing in on him to hear him teaching. And he saw 2 boats by the lake, and he went and he got in those boats and cast out a little bit or from the shore so that he could continue to teach the folks. And when he finished speaking, he said to the person in the boat, which happened to be Simon Peter, let's go out for a catch. And so we pick up at verse 4. And when he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, put out into the deep and let down your nets for a catch. And Simon answered, Master, we toiled all night long, and we took nothing, but at your word I will let down the nets. And when he had done this, they enclosed a large number of fish, and their nets were breaking. And they signaled to their partners in the other boat to come and help them. And they came, and they filled both of the boats, so that they began to sink. But when Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' knees and said, Depart from me, for I am a sinful man, O Lord. For he and all who were with him were astonished at the catch of the fish that they had taken. And so also were James and John, the sons of Zebedee, who were partners with Simon. And Jesus said to Simon, Do not be afraid. From now on you will be catching men. And when they had brought their boats to the land, they left everything and followed him. Notice that Jesus proved himself to Peter. He proved himself. Peter hadn't caught any fish. Those guys with him hadn't caught any fish. And he said, let's go out and go fishing anyway. And when he told them to cast out their nets, they brought back in plenty of fish. In fact, 2 boats full of fish, and enough fish to sink both of those boats. But later on, we're knowing in a story that Peter probably remembered this because they had gathered up all the leftover fish and bread from that little sack lunch, and they had 12 baskets. And so when Peter was carrying that, he was probably thinking of this story that happened just maybe a year earlier. So Jesus completely proved himself to Peter. And because of that, Peter felt so unworthy. Remember, in their culture, there was in the temple, the Holy of Holies. That was a special place where only special people could go. The chief priest to go and meet with God. And he equated Jesus having the power of God, so he felt like he was unworthy to be near Jesus. He saw those miraculous powers, and he knew he was not good enough to be there. He was, after all, just a rough fisherman, and Jesus was a person that had special spiritual power. And Jesus called this man, this ruffian, Peter, to follow him. And I'm sure Jesus said, me? Follow you? What? I think that probably took him off guard. And Jesus knew that Peter would have his doubts and not be assured of what to do. So he uses words that Peter would latch on to, like when he said, follow me. I will make you a catcher of men, or maybe your translation says a fisher of men. Now this is something that Peter knew. I'm a fisherman. I can do this. Now jump forward to Matthew chapter 14, beginning in verse 23. It says, immediately he made the disciples get into a boat and go after him, go before him to the other side, so that he could dismiss the crowds. And after he dismissed them, he went on to a mountain by himself to pray. But when evening came, he was there all alone. But the boat by this time was a long way from land, and it was beaten by the waves, for the wind was against them. Now in the fourth watch of night he came to them, walking on the sea. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, "It's a ghost!" And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take heart, do not be afraid, it is I." And Peter also said, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." And Jesus, and he said, he being Jesus, said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat, and he walked on the water, and he came to Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid and began to sink. He cried out, "Lord, Lord, save me." And Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him, saying to him, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" But when they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." Now Peter asked if he could walk on the water to Jesus. He asked permission for that. I think at the beginning that may just been a little, prove to me who you are. If you're really Jesus, tell me to get out of the water and come to you. And so Jesus called his bluff. "Okay, Peter, come on. Come." I'm sure Peter thought, I maybe should have thought this through a little bit better, but he didn't. So Jesus told Peter to walk towards him by saying, just come. Come right here. Come where I am. He did not say, "Go ahead, get out and walk on the water, do a miraculous thing in any direction you want." No, he said, "Come to me, Peter. Come here." And Peter did. He got out of the boat. He walked all the way over there. And then he got scared. He did okay at first. He went to Jesus. He made it to him. But then he got scared. He began to notice the waves. And when he did, he dropped like a rock. And Jesus had to rescue him. He just reached down and grabbed Peter and pulled him out of the water. He plucked him out of the depths right there. Now notice that Jesus also rebuked him immediately. He didn't wait. The best time for us to get chapped and disciplined by Jesus is right when we have our problem. And so Jesus didn't delay in the correction at all. Now stick with me. Move ahead. Now we're going to Matthew chapter 16. Stick with me to the end. Now when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" And what are they calling me? What do they say? Verse 14, and they said to him, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." And he said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter replied, it was Simon, he spoke up first, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus answered him, "Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter." He changed his name right then. "You are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. I will give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven." Peter was the first one to confess the deity of Christ, of Jesus. He just blurted it out. Everybody else was wondering. They were wanting to say it, but they didn't want to sound foolish, and they didn't want to jump the gun. But Peter, he just went ahead. "You are Christ. You're the Son of God." And because he did that, Jesus promised great things for Peter. "You're going to start my church. You're going to become an heir to the throne with me. You're going to do some great things here." And indeed, we know that. Now jump again to Luke chapter 22. In Luke chapter 22, they had seen some miraculous things, had some victories, and the disciples were fighting amongst themselves of who was the greatest, who would be number 2 to Jesus. And Peter must have been in on this conversation because Jesus turned right around and addressed Peter. So look at Luke 22, verse 31. He refers to him as Simon. He says, Simon, Simon, behold, Satan demanded to have you, that he might sift you like wheat. But I prayed for you that your faith may not fall. And when you have turned again, strengthen your brothers. And Peter said to him, Lord, I am ready to go with you both to prison and to death. And Jesus said, I tell you, Peter, the rooster will not crow this day until you deny me 3 times. Until you deny 3 times that you know me. Jesus reminded Simon of his weak state, not Peter. He went back to Simon before all of this went on. He said, Simon, you don't have the power to do this. If it wasn't for me, Simon, the devil would already had his way with you, but I'm praying for you. Now Peter, even hearing this from Jesus, after confessing that he was Jesus, that he was the Son of God, he got cocky. He was a cocky young guy. Jesus just told him, if it wasn't for me, you wouldn't be walking. But he says, I'm willing to go to you to prison. I'm willing to go with you to death. And so Jesus burst his bubble. He predicted Peter's denial, and the air went out of him in front of everybody right there. Pride comes before a fall, and Peter just fell. Now look down at verse 54 of that same chapter, Luke 22. Then he seized him and led him away, bringing him into the high priest's house. And Peter was following at a distance. And when they had kindled a fire in the middle of the courtyard and sat down together, Peter sat down among them. Then a servant girl, seeing him as he sat in the light and looking closely at him, said, This man was also with him. But he, Peter, denied it. He said, Woman, I don't know him. And a little later, someone else saw him and said, You are also one of them. But Peter said, Man, I'm not. In verse 59, after an interval of about an hour, still another insisted, saying, Certainly this man was with him, for he too is a Galilean. But Peter said, Man, I don't know what you're talking about. And immediately, while he was speaking, the rooster crowed. Verse 61, And the Lord turned and looked at Peter. And Peter remembered the saying of the Lord, how he said to him, Before the rooster crows today, you will deny me 3 times. And he went out and wept bitterly. Peter denied Jesus 3 times, just like Jesus said. Jesus was right. Peter was wrong. And after that 3rd time, he turned and looked right at him. What a gut punch. What a gut punch right there. He got a spiritual wind knocked out of him right there. He couldn't believe it. He had failed. And he remembered Jesus' prediction, and he experienced great guilt, and he left weeping, and not just crying, but weeping bitterly, is what the scripture says. Well, we know that Jesus was killed, and he was buried, and then he rose again. We know that he appeared to Peter sometime that first morning. But evidently, he didn't settle Peter's denial, Peter's guilt over what had happened the night that Jesus was arrested, because of what happens in John chapter 21. Turn to John chapter 21. We'll begin with verse 3. Peter had seen Jesus already risen, but not for a few days, and so Peter didn't know what to do, so he did the thing that would just come normal and natural to him. In verse 3, Simon Peter said, I'm going fishing. I'm going back to where I used to do. And they all said, well, we'll go with you. And they went out and they got in the boat. But that night they caught nothing. Verse 4, just as the day was breaking, Jesus stood on the shore, yet the disciples did not know that it was him. Jesus said to them, Children, do you have any fish? And they answered him, No. He said to them, Cast the net on the right side of the boat, and you'll find some. So they cast it, and now they weren't even able to haul it in because of the quantity of the fish. And the disciple whom Jesus loved, that's John who's writing this, therefore said to Peter, "It is the Lord." And when Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on his outer garment, for he was stripped for work, and he threw himself into the sea. And the other disciples came in the boat, dragging the net full of fish, for they were not far from the land, about 100 yards off. And when they got out on the land, they saw a charcoal fire in place, with fish laid on it, and bread. And Jesus said to them, he said to all of them now, listen, bring me some of the fish that you just caught. Verse 11, and Simon Peter went aboard and hauled the net ashore full of fish, 153 of them. And although there were so many, the net was not torn. Jesus reminded Peter how it all started. Kind of a spiritual deja vu. Peter thinking, I'm just fishing. This is just my life now. Stinks to be me, but this is my life now. Then this man yells out, and the fish abounds. He remembers that this happened a long time, about 3 years before. And he remembers that it was Jesus. So Peter does what any guilty person would do. He recklessly went to Jesus. This has to be fixed. There was no question this time about the water. He wasn't saying, can I come to you? Bid me come to you. There was no asking this time. He just put on his cloak and he jumped. He desired to be right with Jesus. Here's the weird thing. Jesus told them to bring some of the fish they caught, but he already had some on the fire. He already had some fish and bread on the fire. He was already cooking. And he told them, why don't you just bring me some of the fish? Peter didn't wait for any of them. He got up by himself. He went and got the fish. He brought, not some, he brought it all. 153 fish to Jesus. He brought them all. You see, when you're guilty and it's tearing you up inside, you'll do reckless things, big things, to try to get back into favor with Jesus. Now look at John 21, verses 15 and following. When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? And he said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And he said to him, feed my lambs. He said to him a second time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And he said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He said to him, tend my sheep. Then he said to him a third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, do you love me? And he said, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. And Jesus said to him, feed my sheep. Truly, truly, I say to you, when you were young, you used to dress yourself and walk wherever you wanted. But when you're old, you will stretch out your hand and another will dress you and carry you where you do not want to go. He said this to show what kind of death was to glorify God. And after this, he said to him, follow me. Jesus questioned Peter 3 times. He let Peter tell him 3 times that he loved him, not because he needed to hear it 3 times, but because Peter did. He remembered the 3 times that he denied him, and he gave him a chance to rectify that 3 times. And then Jesus reaffirmed his desire for Peter to start his church. What did he say? Feed and tend my sheep. Peter, then he predicted Peter's future again. Verses 18 and 19, he says, you're going to die for me. You're strong enough to die for me now. And he restored the relationship with Peter by saying once again, follow me. All of that is behind us now. No need for guilt. No need for shame. I've dealt with it. You've told me you love me. Now follow me. What a story. What does all this mean for us? I don't know who's out there needs to hear this, but this is what I'm supposed to tell you today. A broken spiritual relationship can be restored. If you like Peter, you might be having a relationship with Jesus in your life like him is a constant, continuous, up and down conversation with Jesus. Can I just remind you that Jesus has proven himself to you? And he's calling you to follow him. Jesus rose from the grave proving that he was divine. And he calls you. That's what Matthew chapter 11 is all about. Matthew 11:28. Come to me, all who are labor and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I'm gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. You chose to follow him. And you've experienced some awesome things. You've seen the power of God work in and through you. Your friends saw a difference in you and asked what that's all about. And you've been a witness for him. But you've had your spiritual ups and downs, haven't you? You've gotten better at righteous living. Those downs are further apart, but they still come. I wish I could sit right here and tell you that people who follow Jesus would have perfect, awesome lives, but that would be a lie. The Christian lifestyle is tough. We have to learn to overcome our temptations. Learn to overcome the wiles of the enemy. And so we have our ups and downs. And in those ups, we tend to get a little cocky. And we need to be reminded that we can't make it without him. It's in our nature to get that way, by the way. Whenever we have a victory, it builds up confidence, and confidence unchecked will develop pride in our life, and pride comes before a fall. And he'll remind us, harshly if he needs to, that we can't even walk without holding his hand. He loves us too much to let us go on like that. Maybe you were even tempted to deny him for a while. Maybe you're there now. And you've not been living right. And you're experiencing that awful guilt. And it's a gut punch today. You realize you've hurt him. He's looking right at you. You just want to curl up and die. Can I just tell you that Jesus won't forsake you? He will help you remember. He'll remind you of his love, remind you of who he is, remind you of what he's done with your sin. He will remind you gently at first, but harshly if you stiffen your back. But if you allow him, he can restore you to his plan. It's never too late for a Christian, never. You can never go too far. You can always turn back to God. And you might think it's unattainable. And so you settled into your normal lifestyle thinking this is not good, but this is all I have. It's not true. Let him remind you of what he's called you to do and to be. His brother or sister. His fellow servant in God's plan. He's called you to be an overcomer. He's called you to be right with himself. And all you have to do is jump. That's all Peter had to do. He just was reckless, and he jumped, and he went to Jesus. Are you ready to jump and go to Jesus? Are you tired of lugging around all that guilt and shame? Today you can jump to Jesus. Would you pray with me? And if you're ready to do that, you just pray this in your spirit. God, I've been away long enough. I'm tired of carrying this guilt. So I'm once again asking you to forgive me and restore our relationship. God, I'm asking you to draw me to you again. Please deal with my sin and my guilt and my shame again. And I commit myself to you. Thank you for not forgetting about me. It's in your name I pray. Amen. If you prayed that prayer, just know that Jesus is pro you. He's pulling you, not pushing you. He's forming and disciplining you, not just beating you down. Jesus is pro you. If you prayed that prayer, I want to pray with you more. I want to encourage you. Find the link below and contact me. Send me a text or an email. I'll pray with you about anything. But just know that He's for you. Well, I hope this was an encouragement to you today. We'll look at a brand new conversation next week. But until then, have a great week. Be blessed. Call me if you need me. And I'm pulling for you. Have a great week.